Pan American World Airways is one of the most iconic airlines in history. It was the vision and determination of entrepreneur Juan Trippe that took the operator to unprecedented heights during some of the aviation industry's most golden years. Bright beginnings. Juan Terry Trippe was born in Seabright, New Jersey on June 27, 1899. He had brushes with the aviation world from a young age as he applied for flight training with the United States Navy when the United States entered World War I. He was designated as a naval aviator and was commissioned as an ensign in the United States Naval Reserve after completing training in June 1918. However, he would not be able to experience real combat as the war ended later on that year. Nonetheless, Trippe took his flying expertise with him when he returned to his studies at Yale University. Subsequently, he became the treasurer at the first meeting of the National Intercollegiate Flying Association in 1920. According to Time, which Trippe was on the cover of in 1933, after graduating from Yale in 1921, he temporarily worked on Wall Street. However, his enthusiasm for planes spurred him to quickly venture into other fields. Subsequently, he invested his inheritance money to start his own businesses. Initially, he started a firm with Long Island Airways in New York, a taxi service for the wealthy. Following this unsuccessful project, he joined Colonial Air Transport, which won the first U.S. airmail contract, which was between New York City and Boston. Changing the game. Pan American's story began on March 14, 1927, when it was founded as a shell company by U.S. Air Corps Majors Henry H. Hap Arnold, Carl A. Spaatz, and John Jouett. The three men were looking to compete against Skadter, a German-owned Colombian outfit which went on to become part of Avianca. Even though these three Army officers founded the carrier, it was the leadership of Trippe that helped transform it into an aviation powerhouse. In 1927, Trippe arranged a merger between Colonial Air, the shell company, and another airline called Florida Airways. With the deal completed, he appointed himself as president before inaugurating the first international air service from the U.S. This flight was between Havana, Cuba, and Key West, Florida, on October 19, 1927. According to the New York Times, this was the first ever scheduled flight performed by a United States-based airline. The firm's Fokker F-7 crossed the Strait of Florida to land in the Cuban capital. These positive beginnings swiftly gave the company the confidence to venture into passenger services. So, on January 16, 1928, it served its first flight to Cuba with paying passengers. Trippe's drive was balanced with his business expertise. Before the month was over, 71 passengers paid approximately $50 each for this 90-mile journey. $50 in 1928 is equivalent to $2,500 today. The Pioneer also maximized revenue by striking advertising partnerships with Bacardi. This collaboration promoted Cuba's touristic offerings, which attracted guests from across the Caribbean Sea. Then known as Aviation Corporation of the Americas, Pan Am combined with the Grace Shipping Company in that year to form Panagra. This name was a shortening of Pan American Grace Airways. Over the next few years, the outfit flew across Latin America with its fleet of seaplanes, which were useful at a time when runways weren't so prominent. Business Insider highlights that because the pilots were operating planes that took off on water, they wore sea captain uniforms. Even today, the design of most crew member outfits can be traced back to this decision. At the turn of the 1930s, a secret deal gave Pan Am 84.4% of Skadter's capital. This move effectively made it the Colombian arm of the U.S. airline services. Pan Am would eventually divert its attention to Europe. On March 30, 1939, a Boeing 314 was piloted by Harold E. Gray to perform the carrier's first ever transatlantic passenger flight. The plane left Baltimore for the Horta in the Azores before performing a second leg to Lisbon. The rise continues. Ever the pioneer, Juan Trippe knew there were opportunities to grow across the globe. Trippe took his time to expand across the nations, and after hopping from island to island across the Caribbean, his airline ventured into Mexico and across Latin America. Pan Am's expansion across the Americas was supported by Herbert Hoover, the President of the United States at the time. He became concerned about Germany's foothold in South America, so his administration helped to subsidize the airline's expenses. Check out this cool 1945 advert promoting a 21-hour journey from New York to Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires will be only 21 hours from New York by Clipper, 22.5 hours from New Orleans, 28.25 hours from Los Angeles. When you want to escape snow and ice, Buenos Aires will be warm, because when it's winter here, it's summer there. Tripp also backed the deployment of the Boeing 314 Clipper. The flying boat was the pinnacle of luxury travel at the time. Additionally, it helped Pan Am expand on services across the Pacific, and by the end of the Second World War, it had an extensive global network in place. Here's a look at the airline's 1948 route map. Before the US's entrance into the World War II realm, Tripp recognized how essential air travel would become in the following decades. He acknowledged the vital role that airlines would play in the next generation, saying the following: "In these 20 years, transport aviation has become a tremendous force in the international life of our nation. So rapidly that we have yet to realize it fully, it has reduced the world to 1/5 its former travel size. Its mission has everywhere been one of peace, friendship, of aid in developing mutual benefit of trade and commerce. It has within a single decade swept away forever the age-old barriers of time and distance between this nation and its neighboring republics and the lands beyond the seas. It has already proved itself a vital force for the protection and extension of this nation's world commerce. Equally important, it has proved itself the means by which those friendly nations are being woven into a great community of good neighbors." The Jet Age. The airline would formally change its name to Pan American World Airways in 1950. The decade ahead proved to be integral to the journey of the aviation industry. Tripp's vision was truly recognized when it came to how he and his company contributed to the jet era. Under his leadership, Pan Am was part of two pioneering US aviation feats. The first of these events was on October 26, 1958. This was when the airline made history by launching the first 707 service and the first daily transatlantic jet operation when it flew to Paris from New York. This flight saw a record 111 passengers on the flight. At the time, it was the highest number of travelers ever to board on a single flight of regularly scheduled service. Altogether, Tripp and the airline would take on 20 707s and 25 Douglas DC-8s. These purchases rocked the market, with the aircraft saving considerable time per journey. Therefore, rival operators had no choice but to join the jet race to stay in competition. The second groundbreaking project was in the 1960s with the development of the Boeing 747. This iconic plane went on to become the first wide-body jet when it was introduced in the 1970s. However, Tripp had a key part to play in the brainstorming process. He asked his friend Bill Allen, the president of Boeing, to produce a model much larger than the 707 to match passenger demand. He went back and forth on the design of the aircraft, which was initially going to be a double-decker version of the 707. However, Boeing managed to swing the direction of the design to give birth to the first ever wide-body in the form of the legendary 747. Its almost vertical sidewall and high ceiling gave an abundance of space for passengers following its introduction in January 1970. With Pan Am's vision and the Queen of the Sky's capabilities, the partnership was a match made in heaven. Over 300 passengers could now fly on a single service, lowering operational costs and thus making it cheaper to fly for the general public. This gave way to a whole new generation of travelers, with new passenger segments heading for the air for the first time. During the year that followed the Jumbo's launch, Pan Am served 11 million passengers to 86 different countries. This progress also sparked an overhaul for airports across the globe. In order to facilitate hundreds of travelers arriving and departing at a time, hubs upgraded their lounges, check-in counters, and terminals in the succeeding decades. Leaving a legacy. After 4 decades of being at the helm of Pan Am, Tripp gave up the presidency of the airline in 1968. Nonetheless, he continued to attend board meetings and still had an office at the company's building in Park Avenue, New York. On April 3, 1981, the revolutionary passed away after suffering a second stroke at his home in New York City. He was 81 years old at the time of his passing. Unfortunately, Pan Am would be brought down by intense competition from the introduction of the Airline Deregulation Act in 1978 and rising fuel prices. Pan Am wasn't the only airline to be affected during the 1980s. In fact, other major carriers such as Braniff International Airways, Capital Air, Eastern Airlines and Pacific Southwest Airlines all suffered as a result of deregulation. However, it was the 1988 Lockerbie disaster that was the final straw for the airline. On the 21st of December 1988, 259 people on board a New York-bound Boeing 747 were killed, along with 11 people on the ground. In the aftermath, United States and British investigators found fragments of a circuit board and a timer. It was subsequently ruled that a bomb caused the explosion and not mechanical failure. Not only was it a PR disaster, but it led to a $300 million lawsuit, along with an additional fine from the Federal Aviation Administration due to 19 security failings. Subsequently, Pan Am filed for bankruptcy protection in January 1991. Acquiring Pan Am's transatlantic routes prior to Pan Am's collapse, Delta Airlines claims that the firm was losing $3 million per day during the latter part of that year. Despite revival attempts, the airline was shut down once and for all on December 4th, with around 7,500 employees of the airline losing their jobs. Despite all of this, the airline's founder would still be recognized for his contributions to the aviation industry. Tripp has received several posthumous accolades. These include the awarding of the Medal of Freedom by US President Ronald Reagan and the induction into the Junior Achievement US Business Hall of Fame in 1990. Altogether, Tripp displayed his expertise across the board when it came to aviation. He undoubtedly understood the marketing side of the business. However, he also knew how to ensure that the industry could deliver on its potential. Altogether, Pan Am shaped the course of the industry in a multitude of ways. From its ambitious routes to its game-changing aircraft, Pan Am's legacy will continue to live on. Much of this is thanks to the leadership and vision of Juan Tripp. What are your thoughts about the journey of Juan Tripp and Pan Am? Do you have any fond memories flying with Pan American over the years? Let us know what you think of the entrepreneur and his legacy in the comment section. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to the Simple Flying channel and be sure to click the notification bell.